People who hired a personal investigator, what did you uncover? We discovered that the driver who hit me not only went off the side of the road where I was, legally, four-wheeling on a quad, and she was talking on the cell phone, looking into the passenger seat, driving with no insurance and a revoked license, because of previous convictions for causing accidents. After the truck, pushing my quad in a T-boned position, plowed so much dirt up in front of us that after 70 feet it finally came to a halt. The investigator had evidence that she was driving 35 miles per hour in a 25 zone and she didn't brake after impact. After the truck came to a stop, she jumped out and started running away, but witnesses caught her and held her there. My friend who was sitting behind me, both of us 14, were carted off in ambulances and I never saw the woman's face. The trooper wrote the report that I, 14 years old, had taken an RV instead of ATV and pulled out in front of the woman, even though it was clear the accident happened off the roadway. The trooper interrogated me while I was laying on the ground waiting for ambulances before my parents even arrived. I was in shock while he rephrased the question, have you had any alcoholic or illegal substances today, several times. My neighbors finally asked him to wait until my parents arrived. In the hospital room he questioned me further while my parents were on their way. The nurse had to ask him to stop as my neck was being evaluated and I had not even had pain medication yet. The accident was deemed my fault, although there were 2 eyewitnesses who testified against the woman to the trooper and later in court, and I was told by the DMV I would have to pay the woman's truck damages before I was allowed to get a driver's license, and I carried SR22 insurance for 5 years after I received it. The investigator uncovered proof that the trooper knew the woman who hit me and was possibly family friends with her. For the months in between the accident and when the investigation was complete, I fought an awful amount of guilt, believing it was my fault and not having any memory of the accident. My friend's leg was badly injured and required extensive surgeries over the next 5 years, and she was visiting from Texas and had to be medevaced back there via helicopter, which left her family with a huge financial burden. During that time, I even considered suicide and took one attempt that thankfully failed. My parents took the case to the state Supreme Court over the course of the next 3 years, and when we finally came to trial the judge said the only way the report could be cleared and the financial obligations relieved is if the state trooper took back his statement. When we began going that route we were told the trooper had been dismissed from the force for wrongful behavior and his testimony was worth nothing. That was an expensive lesson in corruption. The financial stress contributed greatly to my parents' divorce. However, if we hadn't hired the investigator, we may have went on thinking it was my fault. I'm very thankful to know that it truly wasn't. My wife hired one. She found that she was wasting money and that I'm a very boring person. Edit. I didn't expect anyone to read my reply. We came from different cultures, but we knew we wanted to be with each other. She's Hispanic, born in another country, and I'm a hillbilly from Appalachia. There was a lot of jealousy early on both sides, because we simply couldn't relate. After a while, I grew tired of being suspicious and told her that if she wanted to be with someone else to just tell me and I'll move on, but just tell me. It was very freeing for me. I guessed to her though it only made her more suspicious. I got off work at 7 AM and there wasn't much to do and not many places that were open for a couple more hours, so I would go to the gym. She worked an early first shift job, so we didn't see each other in the mornings and I guess she didn't like not being able to account for the gap between me leaving work and me coming back to the apartment. The guy she hired to follow me around was terrible. I had my routine: get off work, go to the gym, go grab some breakfast, hit up Blockbuster, maybe go to a pet store. We had birds and fish. At that time in the morning these places are empty. Like I said, I'm a boring person. Cut to a few days later, I leave the gym and the new guy behind. Head to a restaurant, and in comes the new guy from the gym. Creepy. I eat then leave, go to Blockbuster, and in he comes. So here I'm suspicious. The next day at the gym, I'm telling my buddy about how creepy it was for the new guy to show up everywhere I go, and he agrees. I'm done working out, and tell my buddy that I'm going to leave and that I'm going to a specific pet store, and if the guy leaves the gym right after me, that my buddy should head to the same pet store. And that was what happened. I go to the store, a couple minutes later in walks the guy, and a minute after that in comes my buddy. We ended up pinning the guy to the floor. I asked why, and he starts saying that it's just a job and that he ain't seen nothing. We release him back into the wild with the order that he's not to show up at the gym again. I get home, call her up, and say that she hired the biggest idiot around and that she needs to stop wasting money. She asks, what happened? I tell her to ask him, since she gave him money. Her jealousy died down after that. Well, that, and I made the ultimate quote to her that made sense. I said, if I was getting laid as much as you think I am, wouldn't I be a lot happier? And that was that. For those folks hoping for a different ending, sorry to disappoint. We've been together for almost a quarter of a century, and everything is fine. Maybe she just couldn't believe that she was involved with someone so boring. Okay, so I'll bite. Nothing like hunting down a psycho ex or anything like that, but interesting enough. So I was living in England and had an uncle living in assisted living in California. He was 95 at the time, a little fuzzy about some things, but on the whole, sharp as a tack. He was deeply religious and attended church weekly. A couple of women from the church had made friends with him, drove him to church, brought him trinkets and whatnot, basically took care of him, sort of. Sounded okay to me. Hell, I was in England, what was I going to do? The only thing that jarred me a little bit was one time when I talked to the women on the phone. One of them told me that my uncle had signed over power of attorney to them. That struck me as a little odd. My uncle and I weren't really close, but being his heir, along with my brother, wouldn't he have told me about it? I shrugged it off, though. Again, what was I going to do? I was 6,000 miles away. Besides, and this is what gets a lot of people, he was of sound mind. He was a free agent, so it was really none of my faking business. A year or two go by, I check on him periodically, everything seems fine. I come home one night and my phone is ringing. It's the assisted care residence sheet. What's happened? Is he dead? He's 97 faking years old. I was expecting it any day. No, it's these two little old ladies there trying to get my uncle to sign over power of attorney to them. Wait a minute, hadn't he already done that? The alarm bells go off. Something is deeply wrong, and it was going to take me at least 24 hours to get back to California, given connections, flights, renting a car, blah, blah, blah. So I called a pie from England, tell him the situation, and as soon as I can get to the part about the women, he stops me and says, wait, let me tell you how this story goes. He then proceeds to tell me that this is a common scam. These women cruise the churches, looking for these little old guys who, on the surface, have no family to speak of, and healthy retirement and investment accounts. So I get my ass back to California ASAP. Unfortunately, my uncle has signed nothing, although at this point, they're harassing him hard. They had even kidnapped him, and taken him to an attorney, and tried to get him to sign over power to them. Little did they know who they were dealing with. My dad's side of the family sets the gold standard for stubbornness. I learned this early on, when my dad said no, that was it, give it up, because that was an answer that was not going to change. My uncle, all 100 pounds and 97 years of him, had dug in his heels. So we sign over power to me, and now the hunt begins. Where was his accounts? These women handed over nothing to me, a few receipts, but no accounts, nothing. So this pie, and ended up hanging out for a few days, tracking everything down. I cannot begin to tell you how much I learned from this man, a complete original. Vietnam vet, former SEAL, carried a knife in his boot and a gun in his shoulder holster. So he shows me, it's mostly research, and that I resonate too, since I'm in research. Painstaking, boring, turning over one pebble at a time kind of investigation. Knowing how to talk to people, how to observe. It requires a massive amount of patience. We went to every bank within 20 miles, and by schmoozing and showing my power we found what we thought was every account. I then went over everything. They had played a shell game, borrowed from him, hadn't quite stolen from him, but it took quite a while to figure out what they had done. Then I find the piece de resistance. They had him sign over all of his retirement accounts to them, or more specifically, to the younger one, being a spry 81 years old. So we do some further investigation. Turns out this one is broke. Looks like she sent it back to the Philippines, or something. She spent a lot of time in Vegas. So here's how it shakes out. A common scam. These two little Jezebels made a play for my uncle, who fell for the younger one hook, line, and sinker. They get him to sign over all of his retirement accounts to them, and then all they have to do is outlive him. At 81 and 83, respectively, and my uncle 96, should be easy. So I confront them, told them that I knew what they were doing, and that I could turn them in. I had the evidence. I didn't really. I only strongly suspected, if they didn't tell me what else they had done. So they spilled the beans, told me what they had done. They swore they had only borrowed the money. We got it all signed back over. I didn't turn them in. I figured it would all come out in the wash anyway. I didn't want to see them go to jail, and I wasn't sure I could prove it anyway. But if it wasn't for this pie who had my back, they would have gotten away with it. I'm a firm believer. I learned a sheetin from him. Now for the editorial. This crime is rampant, intimidating, bamboozling, and ripping off the elderly. Most DAs won't touch it. If you even get a whiff that an elderly relative is being abused or ripped off, if it even crosses your mind, step in immediately. Kick ass and take names. You may be the only defense they have. But I'll tell you, it turned out to be one of the most interesting experiences of my life. My uncle got the last laugh. He outlived both of them and passed away peaceably at 100 years old with me there with him. One of the last things he told me was that he had forgiven them for what they had done. TLDR, elderly uncle is nearly scammed out of $500,000 by a couple of Jezebels cruising the churches. Pi steps in and saves the day. I'll earn a crapton. Edit, gilded comment. Thanks, kind stranger. Edit 2, I had no idea this would blow up like this. A lot of people have asked me what did I learn. A couple things. 1. Sometimes you have to be a badass, but you can still temper that with mercy. Although I have to admit I enjoyed the hell out of scaring them a bit. And 2. My uncle was an amazing man. I'm proud to be related to him. I was very surprised at this one. I went and retrieved my 25-year-old girlfriend from her conservative religious Middle Eastern family. In their culture, women are not treated as adults with their own freedoms. They have the freedom of a child until they are married off. I would never have been accepted by her father due to my Christian white American upbringing. When she was in the country, I hopped on a plane, got her, and brought her home with me. I was already working out the paperwork needed to marry her and let her stay in the country legally, but had not yet filed anything. She never discussed me with them, and they did not have even the slightest clue where she went, or if there was someone else involved helping her. They only knew that she left. Her father hired a PI to track her down. Within 2 days of her getting on the plane with me, her aunt and uncle, siblings, not spouses, were at my door. One lived on the opposite side of the country from me, and the other had just flown in from the Bay. They had logs of all our conversations, every one of her different names, and a lot of information about me and my family. Sigh. She's back out of the country now. I keep hoping I'll get the chance to see her again. I finally had to make a throwaway for this one. When I was 10, my parents separated and went through a nasty divorce. Sometime during all of that, he hired a PI to follow my mom around. The PI concluded that my mother was a prostitute. She did escort service and hung around doctors' conventions. The PI took photos and logged everything. My dad snuck into the house my mother and I lived in with a camcorder and recorded the discover of a ledger documenting all of her clients and the money exchange. He leveraged it in the divorce, so he didn't get bent over entirely. My dad didn't tell me any of this until I was in my 17 or so. I didn't believe it until I thought back and remembered some things. She had a pager, and back in the 90s only a few types of people had pagers: doctors and hokers. She would suddenly be gone late at night. If I woke up, she would always say she was out grocery shopping. I also remember walking in on her wearing a revealing dress made of leather. No more revealing than what girls wear to the club, but that shit is weird when it's your mom and you are 10. In a hoe. My dad still throws it at me when he wants to prove how much better of a person he is than my mother or my stepdad, who married a hooker. In her defense, she was paying her way to become an RN, which she is now. TLDR, I followed my mom for my dad during a nasty divorce. Found out she was a hooker. Dad holds grudge to this day and told his kids about it. Not me, but my mom was an attorney who worked in workers' compensation insurance. Her colleagues were representing a woman who had been gravely injured on the job and deemed totally unable to work. The opposing attorney hired a PI to investigate this woman. Let's call her Jane. They get to court and present the video footage as their platinum evidence proving that this woman was totally able to work. Here Jean is mowing her lawn. Here she is unloading her groceries from her car. Here she is walking the dog. Here she is going for a run. etc. Jane's attorneys sat there totally quiet. When it was their turn to cross-examine the PI, they declined any questions. Their turn was up next. Who is the first witness for the opposing side? We would like to call Jane's identical twin sister to the stand. Jane's identical twin had moved in with her bedridden sister after the work accident. Full benefits awarded to Jane. Apparently the look on the faces of the opposing attorneys was the stuff lawyers' dreams are made of. Throwaway here. I never hired a PI, but was followed by one. I was 18 years old and a young girl lived in the same apartment complex as me. Now this girl was a very nice girl, and even looking back, a very pretty and attractive girl, considering she was 14, but morally, I knew better than that. I would often hold small events, BBQs, gaming competitions, basketball tourneys, etc. for preteens and other teens, because it beat getting on meth, or hanging out at some of the seedy shitholes around town, that some kids thought was cool at that time. At first, the parents were understandably skeptical, but who wouldn't be? A young, unlicensed adult was putting out his own money to put on social events for young adults and teens. Anyone would have thought I was a creep, but once I started engaging the parents and earned their trust, they started helping me by sponsoring the events, if you will. The only reason I did any of this is because our local rec center had closed down. I used to love that place, but funding, budgets, blah blah. We all became very close. Parents were telling me they were connecting with their kids again, all that good stuff. I felt great until shit got real. This is what started the stress train that adulthood has brought thus far. So this girl knocks on my door. I had cancelled the games that day because of torrential downpour, but I answered, and she was hurt, eyes black, clear bruises, and in tears. I immediately threw a towel on her and asked her what happened. She told me that she had been assaulted and rapped by two older guys. That's all it took. I insisted on calling the police and her parents immediately. Thankfully, she let me. Anyways, after a week or so, the police were dragging their feet, but she was doing well, but her connection with me had appeared more than friendly. She would touch, hug, and just put me in a weird spot. I wanted her normal too. Not like this though. She even had attempted to come onto me once, but I politely said there was no way it could happen, as I didn't want any trouble for either of us. There wasn't any discomfort after that, surprisingly. Things were returning to normal, finally. She knocked on my door after about a month after the incident and informed me that the two guys that rapped her had been stalking and following her again almost every day. I decided that I should act because the law wasn't in my eyes, but looking back now, I would have sought more help rather than take it into my own hands. But I was pissed. They hurt a kid. Not good in my book. She was a very sweet human and didn't deserve that horror. The next day, just like clockwork, they were following her. She gave me the signal we discussed the day before and alerted me that it was them. She had no idea what I was planning. But they were there, saying crude and derogatory things, teasing, exposing themselves, etc. I was pissed. So pissed my body felt like pure ignited gasoline. I went right up behind them, yelled at her to run like hell, and cranked one in the face with a tie rod. The other got a square kick in the crotch while he was trying to zip up his piece, then took a fist to the side of the head. Since I had no cell phone, I let out a scream for help. No sooner had I yelled, someone came running up next to me saying he saw it all. Turns out, he was a PI, hired by her dad to follow me. He thought I had been involved in the rap and assault on the girl. He had been following me since they reported the incident, and her dad was convinced that she was covering for me for some reason. This guy had everything on me: emails, MySpace info, family history, just everything. But he had nothing pointing to me being the bad guy in this. He carried zip cuffs on him and called the police. The guys who rapped the girl were 28 and 29. I got a minor assault charge from the older guys, but the judge dismissed it immediately. Last I heard they were both denied parole for their life sentences. Got a call from her dad later that week after the paperwork, politics, and red tape. He invited me over. We had some beers and became very good friends since then. He's a good man, was just looking out for his little girl. He still buys me a beer whenever I go back home for any reason. TLDR, followed by Pi. Because a 14 years old girl's dad thought I rapped and beat her, Pi witnessed me violently attack the real assailants and contributed to capture. Girl's dad and I are still good friends. Edit. Thank you/u/Socrates 666 and /u/Ollington_Hick for the gold. This situation gained lots of notoriety in my town, but thank you. You both have made my day. I feel I should say something, so here is a quote I have always believed in and stood by. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing. Edmund Burke. Edit. Should clarify, the reason the two ended up with a life sentence each is they both had priors for violent crimes, arson, drug trafficking, etc. There was more than just a child sexual assault charge that put them away. Edit. Clarity, grammar, spelling. I'm not a Pi, but I have a story. I'm a PC repair tech and a computer guy for my circle of friends. A relative of a friend of mine approached me one day and asked if I could help in finding his brother on the internet somehow. His brother had up and left town with no indication of where he was going, leaving a wife and 2 small children behind. They were not separated and still lived with the kids. He took little more than the clothes on his back. They didn't know if he was in trouble, running from someone, or just a deadbeat. They brought me his passworded desktop PC, which was an XP machine and easily cracked. There wasn't anything in the browser history, the documents folders had nothing, and the machine was relatively blank. I did find a World of Warcraft installation though, and inside that was everything that I needed. In the game screenshots folder I found several shots of his dwarf talking to a female night elf, very cute as he like, including some chat lines about being together and flirty emotes. It was clear what he had done. This turbo nerd left his family for an elf. In the screenshots I could see a few add-ons. One particular WoW add-on, Pratt, that he had installed, has a scrollback chat buffer it saves. I was able to locate the settings file containing that buffer, and in it was his last conversation with her before leaving, including an actual address 800 miles away. Google provided a name, phone number and satellite photo of her house and car. They were blown away when I gave them his pinpoint location. He called the number right there on his cell phone and asked for him, and sure enough he was there, probably shocked to sheet to get a call from his brother after this disappearing act. As far as I know, he did not return home, but I'm sure my little detective work made sure the kids got their child support. TLDR, Turbo Nerd Dwarf Hunter becomes the hunted. Preface: I'm not a hacker. Social hacking, social engineering / manipulating / etc. is not computer hacking. People keep asking me to teach them. Literally Google whatever you want to know and it's there. I also was not a certified Pi. I was a dude online who got asked to find his wife. I wasn't advertising it. The guy had seen one of my logs from past targets and wanted to know if I could help. That's it. I've posted this story before and it'll probably get buried now, but here goes. I did some Pi work digitally in high school. I did a bit of social hacking and got fairly skilled at finding information. Out of the blue I got a message one day from an ex-marine who wanted me to help him find his wife. Some background: his wife had taken off with his daughter, allegedly at her parents' place. He was worried because she knew she was in bed with some bad people, literally, and was worried about his daughter, but he did not want to involve the police yet. So he gives me her information, and I start hunting her. He told me the address where she was supposed to be, got the IP for that address, needs to be mentioned, and I googled a lot. I also used a couple custom doxers that some friends had compiled. What I found regarding her, she was extremely kinky, into heavy bondage, and more importantly bestiality. She liked horses a lot. I found her equestrian profile, found her friend who was constantly commenting on her page, and looked him up. What a surprise, guy owns a horse ranch an hour out from where the ex-marine lives. So I decide to try and verify her location. I spoof a bank email to her. She replies, I asked for no info, no SS/etc. Just to verify it was her email associated with the bank. Then I found her IP in the Yahoo email header. I also used an IP trace link. She clicked it, gave me her connected location, and traced that IP. Well, it landed about 8 minutes from the horse ranch, where it just so happens that guy lived. He had a ranch off in the plain/forest area, and a house on the street. She replied from his house. She had their daughter at a location where she, in all likelihood, was taking horse stick. I sent all my evidence to the ex-marine. He had offered to pay me a couple grand. I took a couple hundred and told him to save the rest for a vacation with his daughter. Couple months later he thanks me, got a divorce, and got custody of his kid. I believe they went to Florida for the vacation. A few of his ex-marine pals messaged me later for help, but by then I had left the hacking world after a close call. That's it. TLDR, ex-marine's wife was getting plugged by a horse with her daughter in the house. Apparently. Edit. Story isn't BS. Take it as you want it. The Yahoo part was the header, and I used a link falsified to be her bank, and it got her IP. Figured I'd rather not put every little thing I used in. I used the header for the general location, got her actual, when she clicked the link. This happened 7 years ago, things have changed. I'm not a hacker, I just interacted with people who did. I did social engineering, which meant I'm good at lying and interpreting, as well as maintaining a persona. I don't do this now, I haven't for years. This story is old, but completely true. If I can find any evidence on my old computer I'll post it, but I wiped the drive, except a USB drive of data, when I almost got in trouble. Edit 2. I probably misused terms. Sorry to those in the id field who are thinking, what the fuck just happened? This is the story as accurately as I can convey it. Edit 3. I don't believe the daughter knew about any of this. The guy told me later that he divorced and got his daughter in the divorce. All I know. I didn't care to investigate. I was young and given a couple $100 to spend. Edit 4. Took out a thing about compiling code. I didn't remember what it was while writing. It was the header. I fixed the paragraph to be more clear. Also, I don't believe anything I did, aside maybe send the spoof email from a bank. Granted it had a warning in near white print saying it's been generated with X program, was illegal. I'm a very cautious person and I wasn't a fan of the people making botnets/ratting people/etc. It got dirty and sadistic quick. Nothing. My husband's ex-wife has shared custody of their 2 children. This is in the UK. He was trying for full custody because of her declining mental health and alcohol abuse. One day he went to pick them up and they were gone. Every time he found them and filed for a court order for visitation, she would move. In the past 8 years, she has had 17 addresses, including a tent in a field. A couple of the courts have informed her family they have a legal obligation to turn over her details. However, they insist they have no contact. As they live in a small village with my in-laws, I believe them, as someone would see them come and go. The last private investigator found them in a rented flat up north, a few weeks after they were evicted. I've written letters to every single school admissions department in England and Wales, and at this point I don't believe they are in school. The last school report we got showed very poor attendance, maybe attending 2 days a week. As they moved out of that county, the children missing education department there wouldn't have followed up on it. So it wasn't really worthwhile on our part, as he found nothing we didn't already know. Our intention was to get an address that was current, and instead of going to court, going through the local child contact center. They deal with reintroductions after extended separation, and would also keep the adults separate. But at this point we are just waiting for them to turn 18. This happened years ago. Our daughter ran away from home when she was just a teenager. We sort of suspected that something was amiss. she suddenly stopped talking to us and started wearing a lot more makeup, which she never did. My wife would sometimes notice that clothes would slowly go missing from our daughter's drawers and closet. We should have seen it coming. The signs were all there. Then one day she just up and left. We had no idea where, but we suspected California. That's where all the dissatisfied farm girls seem to end up after all. We hired a PI to track her down, maybe to convince her to come back to Minnesota. It took him years to get any leads. California is a big state after all, and we weren't even 100% that's where she ended up. Slowly the details came trickling in. She's in Los Angeles. She gave herself a new name. She's a trophy wife for some millionaire. My wife and I really loved that one. /s. The PI was getting so close to finding some real answers. Then one day he called us and told us he found someone else on the case. We were shocked to say the least. Who else could possibly be looking for our daughter? Outside of some family and friends in our town, nobody knew we had hired anyone. Well, whoever this dude was, he kept referring to him as a dude. I guess it just stuck. The PI was really impressed with his work, how he was playing one side off the other, in bed with everyone. Really sneaky stuff. To us he just sounded like some deadbeat in a bathrobe. After that, the detective just sort of gave up. This was 20, maybe 25 years ago. I thought we were so close to finding our daughter, but I guess she just was tired of us. Well, you know what they say, sometimes you eat the bar, and sometimes, well, he eats you. I worked as a PI for a while in some country in Europe in the late 90s. Once got a client wanting to know the whereabouts of his wife that left him and disappeared. After finding her in a small town in Spain and investigating her motives, found out that she was hiding from him because he was related to some fraudulent group and she was afraid he would kill her if he knew where she was, since she knew most of their fraud schemes. I gave her some advice and went back to the country. Told the guy that it was difficult to find her and gave him some fake evidences that she fled to Brazil. Then did some investigation on him and found that the group used the money from CC fraud to buy equipment to print fake money. I informed the police and they, 6 guys, were caught with more than $4 million in fake national and foreign currency. Former PI for 6 years here. Mostly domestic cases, some insurance work. Craziest case we had was in Huntsville, Alabama. Upper middle class client from a really nice home calls us out for a meeting. He found some disturbing emails in his wife's outbox. Doesn't recognize the recipient. After some digging, it looks to be a throwaway. One of the emails has airline info for Huntsville International with pickup instructions. So we go out and set up surveillance in 10 minutes pickup area. Out comes the subject, client's wife, with a male suspect. Male suspect jumps in the driver's seat and our subject begins sucking his dick as they leave the airport. They get a 1/4 mile and start faking the jackrabbits in the FedEx Hub parking lot. I park my car behind a building. I belly crawl with my camera, but it's too dark to get any evidence. I get even closer. I'm 6 feet from the car and all I'm getting is audio. Then the door opens right in front of me. The dome light comes on and reveals everything. Some nasty fat fleshy sex is going on. The male suspect stands up out of the car with his back facing me. He starts to get a blue job from our subject in the doorway of the car. I'm able to get some of the best quality up close money shots of my career as a PI. I get the evidence and call the client. We have a meeting where I reveal the evidence to him. He knows the suspect. He knows him. He is her brother. He gets the kids in the divorce. I work as a fisherman now, fuck being a PI. It's a nasty business. TLDR, former PI caught some dude's wife faking her bro. When I was a kid, my father was bucked off a horse and nearly died. He was bucked so hard he did a complete somersault in the air. When he landed he broke 4 vertebrae, his collarbone, 3 ribs, and ruptured his spleen. We had bought the horse about 1 week earlier from a horse ranch in another state. When we had visited, the horse was gentle and calm as can be. As soon as we had gotten it home, it was a lot more aggressive. The ranch we bought it from told us that the previous owner was an 80-year-old woman who sold it because it was too big for her to ride anymore. Well, we were a bit suspicious how such a gentle horse had gotten so nutty when there had been no sign of it being unstable before. Yes, animals are still animals and can be unpredictable, but we wanted to be sure. So we hired a private investigator. As it turned out, the ranch had been heavily sedating the horse, who had had at least 3 previous owners. The previous owner was not a little old lady at all, but rather a guy who had been killed in a knife fight at a bar. They drugged a horse with a history of unpredictable behavior, just so they could get it off their hands, and nearly killed my dad. It was an absolute miracle he wasn't paralyzed from his injuries, and his back still hurts him almost every day. His lungs filled up with so much blood, and were so damaged, that now approximately 1/3 of his lung capacity has been replaced by scar tissue. He's overweight and diabetic, in large part, because he can't do much cardio or exercise at all. He had been a runner, now that's impossible, because of the pain. The kicker? He decided that, if he had to struggle through a lawsuit it would cause him so much extra stress he couldn't bear it, so even though we had rock solid proof they got away with it. Only slightly PI-like. More, how the UK police seem to happily hand over information. I used to work for a particular company doing network engineering. Just to paraphrase, this particular company was one of those in the spotlight type companies whereby we were likely to get a lot of protests by certain organizations. Well, one day there was such a protest and I couldn't help notice that as I was driving into the site, one of the protesters was busy with a camera and seemed to be taking photographs of car number plates entering and leaving the buildings. I duly reported this concern to my manager who appeared pretty uninterested, as did the hour's debt I eventually raised it to. Anyway, about 2 weeks later I get a card through my door from the cops with my name on it. It just said, John 6, could you please give me a call when you get a chance? Well, it was about 10 PM when I got home to find the card, and I was jetting off at 6 AM to work another contract role. I knew I'd be out all day, so I figured I'd call the day after that sometime. It slipped my mind if I'm honest. Another 2 days later, I come home, and there's a cop car outside my door. I park up, and the 2 cops inside immediately notice me. I walk up to my door and they both get out. They ask me my name and finally explained that someone had filed a missing persons report about me, and they were concerned for my well-being. It was pretty much open and shut. The cop reported back on his radio that I had been found safe and well. What surprised me is that the cop was not under any obligation to tell me who had filed the missing persons report, and when he radioed back for confirmation, his operator told him that the reporter was not to be identified. Okay, yay, that struck me as odd. I couldn't think of anyone who was particularly missing me. Cue another few months of various issues. I got pulled over several times by the cops under suspicion of driving a reported stolen motor vehicle, my own car, another time acting on information that I was carrying weapons or drugs. It got crazy. After that, I had various random stop and searches when driving my car presumably because I'd been pulled over so many times I was now on the cops' hot list. Now, what concerned me is around about this time I noticed a fair few individuals walking around that seemed familiar. This was on more than one occasion. It took me a while, but then one day I was driving off, and one of them was standing on a corner. He looked straight at me as I turned out, and it clicked that these were the protesters from the protest. You know that look when someone recognizes you? It was basically that. After that, I was noticing them more than a few times around the neighborhood. Now, Oklahoma, I'm happy to assume it was unrelated, and I was being paranoid. But I was working on the assumption that I was being looked for. I did various things like parked the car away from the house, stopped leaving the house in a suit, and changing at work, that sort of thing. I also got all PI one day, when I had a day off. I moved the car to a local multi-story early in the morning, and sat upstairs to keep an eye out. Sure enough, I didn't have to wait long and several of them passed my house multiple times. Of course, the cops were straight up grade A useless. I made a report about my suspicions and the standard response was we can't do anything unless they do something, so good luck with it. Given this protest group's propensity for violence too, yeah. Anyway, around that time, we were set to move from rented to our own mortgaged house. It was just lucky that it was happening at that time. When the time came, we moved. Of course, I no longer worked for that company, as I was contracting. I'd since moved on. I also part X'd the car damn near straight away. Lo and behold, not had a problem since. Call it luck. But I have to wonder. They obviously only ever had a license plate and place of temporary work for me. From that, they managed to convince the cops I was missing, I can only presume somehow, to fix an address for me, had my own car reported stolen, got pulled over under suspicion of carrying drugs or weapons and all the rest of it. Yet I had no way of seeking resolution from this same system, nor any way of having these reports and anonymous tips dealt with in any way. The most I ever got was the cop at the station duly logging the fact I had made a complaint. It seemed to me that the protesters faking with me had way more power than I did, and, to top it all, even managed to show themselves around where I lived, which, by the way, was nowhere near where I had worked at the time of the protests. Okay, sorry, not exactly in the PI theme, but I do wonder how they could have found out such pertinent details from a license plate alone. And what do they still know, etc. This is all UK, by the way. My mom died a few years ago, leaving my 16-year-old sister with no one to care for her. I was now living in Florida and had to make the trip up to Detroit. My auntie was trying to get custody of my sister because we think she wanted that money from the state again. Sister was fostered to her once before, did not go well. So I get to Detroit where I was raised and get picked up by my other Aunt Jay on the way my family's estate. I noticed a black Crown Victoria with tinted windows a few cars back. Why do pies feel the need to drive cop cars? I asked to stop for lunch. We didn't in the grocery store across the way from the restaurant. That car was sitting in the parking lot. Not very sneaky. When we left the restaurant, sure enough, 4 cars back, that same Crown Victoria. Now I grew up in downtown Detroit. I'm glad I was able to escape, but needless to say most of my childhood friends are still on the block. We decided to take a drive down my old street when a few cars seemed to have pulled in behind the Crown Victoria and a few right in front, and some rather large gentlemen wanted to inquire the nice gentleman what he was doing in that part of the neighborhood. Now if you ask me, that is the neighborhood watch program I can live with. That pie had a very bad day. I only know it was a pie because the local police came to my family's estate to question my aunt and I about what happened. Not my fault the guy went into a bad neighborhood and the locals got upset. After all, my aunt was just showing me, the guy from Florida, some of the older neighborhoods. We all knew that auntie hired a pie to try and grab some dirt. Too bad some people have friends in low places. For the record, my sister is doing fine. Went to live with some of her close friends and keeps in touch with the family on the regular. Also graduated high school and has a few scholarship offers for softball. I'm a private investigator, and my best story aside from a couple of violent incidents is this. Case assigned is a man out with an injury, claims he can't work, completely disabled. I do 2 days, 6 to 4. Never see the guy. Get additional hours, schedule it for 5 AM starts. This guy was leaving at 5:45 to go to work and was getting home around 5:30 PM. Now, this isn't unusual. Plenty of people game the system, but usually they are of the lower tax brackets and do it to make ends meet. Not this fellow. He was a master electrician who now worked in project management, making north of 75k. He was now working at another company, doing the same thing, likely making nearly the same amount. On top of that, it was only 15 minutes away as opposed to the over an hour his old job was, since traffic, and it was north of the city, and there's almost always traffic. Now comes the fun part. I got another 30 hours on the case and head back out. Same thing, heads out early, goes to work. He leaves early this day, about noon time. Drives an hour away to the city, goes to the doctors in the city hospital. No biggie, it was an independent medical exam, set up by the insurance company, so I knew about it. Now it gets good. Afterwards he heads over to the neighborhood of his old job, the one he's out on comp for. Odd, but not totally out of the ordinary. Maybe he's going to stop in, sell the injury a bit, and say hi to the old crowd. Nope. Meets up with a woman, not his wife, and has lunch. I know what you're thinking, but that's not damning in and of itself. I have lunch inside at the bar with a covered camera. Nothing special. They're having some wine, so as soon as I finish my lunch I head back out to my car. 45 minutes later, they exit and they head over to the lady's car, and that's where it becomes damning. They both climb in the back seat and start going at it. After a sufficient scare, where someone gets in the car next to them mid-fac, they move into the back of his truck and finish up. They leave, he heads back to work. Remaining hours uneventful. I close out the case. Shame it never made it to trial, but from what I heard, the look on his face during the conference later that month was priceless. Feel bad for the wife though. Evidently she was there when they showed the surveillance video. He's now getting reamed for the money he was getting on comp and is getting a divorce. TLDR, guy on workers comp from 75k/year job gets another 75k/year job and is also cheating on his wife. I basically ruined his life, but he deserved it. My father was the target of a few pies over a couple of years after he was in a car accident. He went from being a health and fitness freak to being confined to a hospital bed for over a year while recovering from crashing into a tree at 160 km/h while falling asleep at the wheel. Being the stubborn and determined man he is, he decided that instead of accepting the severity of his injuries, he would just continue to soldier on and ignore them and try to go back to work as soon as he was able to do so. He reinforced this belief to the doctors, insisting he was fine despite being in agony all the time and them telling him that he should be slowing down. After a while, the severe nerve pains he was getting in his leg after his ankle fusion operations had become too much, and he asked the doctors if he could have the leg amputated. After insisting that it was best for him, he managed to convince them he was better off without, and they cut his leg off below the knee. He had special prosthetics made for everyday use, and he even got a special one made for cycling. My dad actually did get a job working in a call center and was making great progress with becoming a competitor in long distance cycling. One night on his way home from a ride, a woman talking on her mobile phone cleaned him up in her 4WD and faked him up pretty bad spinal damage, lots of cuts and bruises and a few broken bones. After another long stint in hospital, he came back out and tried to continue on as he had been, but finally had to concede that he wasn't going to work or ride again. By this point he had to lodge a claim with the TAC, Transport Accident Commission. Not long after this happened, we had people parking outside our house all the time trying to catch my dad out, like he was being a fake. I kept telling him I wanted to go put a brick in their window. It was so offensive, they were treating him like a criminal. Anyway, long story short, he did finally get paid out by the TAC for his injuries from the woman, but he had to fight for it for ages. They were trying to dispute that his injuries were a result of his first accident. He got a write-up in the local paper about it too because he was quite well known at the hospital. www.bendigo advertiser. Oh, and the article makes it sound like he got his leg amputated from the accident. He didn't. That happened much later, when he decided he had enough of the nerve pain. My father hired a pie after divorcing my mother to prove that my mother was cohabitating with her boyfriend, which was a violation of the alimony agreement and meant the monthly payments would stop. Not the child support, just the alimony per my state's regulations and the divorce agreement. My mother insisted she was not living with him, but he definitely was living in our house. My dad asked me and my brother, and we confirmed that he was there every night and every morning, and that he had his mail delivered to our house. This happened when I was 12, but I didn't find this out until I was about 16 or 17. At the time of the investigation, my mom broke up with said boyfriend, claiming that the age difference between them was too much. She was about 15 years older than him. Turns out that it was really because my dad confronted her with the tapes and she knew that she'd lose out on her monthly income. She was working at the time, but had just started a new career that was commission based and was not making much, so she depended on the alimony to keep her comfortable lifestyle. I did see the tapes, nothing exciting or dramatic, but it was slightly weird to see myself and my brother blissfully unaware that we were being followed everywhere, even having pictures taken through the windows of our home. Now I get that my dad had to do it because my mother was such a selfish, conniving person. There's much more than just this example to show that, unless you want this thread to turn into my parent is an absolute lunatic, I'll just assume you can imagine the sheet she pulled over the years. The saddest part is that my mother and father have been divorced for over 20 years now, and my mother has never cohabitated with a man because she does not want to lose the alimony. She has lifetime alimony in the divorce agreement. I think it's really terrible that she is willing to deny herself a healthy relationship because she's hung up on money. Then again, she once told me that she would never settle down until she met a rich man who could provide her with the lifestyle she was seeking, not having to work, big house, travel, etc. So I guess my dad is a suka who gets to keep her comfortable until she meets this rich man. Pie here. In regards to the comments about hiring a pie being expensive, I can definitely confirm this. In Colorado I work as an attorney's investigator doing criminal defense investigation, interviewing witnesses and such for all kinds of cases ranging from little stuff to murder cases and some other crazy stuff. That stuff is generally paid through the state and pays the lowest, around $36-41/hours. Private pay cases through attorneys that I work for, I usually charge $50-65/hour depending on the attorney. For people off the street or people that want the typical cheetah style surveillance, I charge $75 hour. All cases I charge fire mileage and travel time. So yeah, it can get expensive. For the comments about it being a boring job, yes and no. The surveillance can be super boring if nothing is happening, but when following someone and catching them in the act, it's almost like you're a spy or something, and can be exciting at times. Criminal cases can be interesting, but being that I'm a defense attorney's investigator, it can be difficult justifying helping some clients. I've had to assist in the defense of people charged with child molestation, rape, domestic violence, murder, all kinds of stuff. Work is generally interesting though, and I rarely see the same thing twice. Growing up I had a friend Jason whose mom was a pie. She was a total mom jeans type in a station wagon with fake wood side paneling. I thought it must be an awesome job, but it was apparently very boom or bust for income and hours. Her two biggest regular clients were a big local law firm that handled a lot of divorces, and an insurance company in the area, who would hire her when they felt people were faking disability claims on their home ER1s or mobile home insurance. Imagine someone claiming they slipped on the ice on your walkway and now they say they can't work because of back pain. Only she follows them for a few days and has pictures of them playing beer league softball and water skiing. Jason's mom actually had background in accounting, so the law firm would refer her to clients in divorces, custody, and alimony cases when they felt money was being hidden, or any time people who already had a lawyer wanted a recommendation for a pie. I have no idea what she charged. Then the rest of her cases were marital infidelity and gathering evidence for the divorce and custody fights in court. Is he/she cheating? With whom? Most spouses seemed to know there was cheating. What they wanted more than anything was to know who it was. Some of the saddest cases I remember her telling us about were people trying to prove drug and alcohol or other abuse in custody disputes. Like the father had every other weekend visitation and my friend's mom was trying to gather proof of the mother abusing heroin. I don't really have many specific cases I remember, but I recall that she was pretty computer savvy for the day. I remember her using Gopher and Telnet back on the 2400 baud modem to search tax records and whatnot. In retrospect, it was shocking what info she could find online back in the day. She could usually pull state tax returns for people if she knew their SS number. She could also find the records that employers and financial institutions reported to the state that showed the interest paid on investments. I recall she was super proud of her ability to get that info. In retrospect, I wonder if she was a hacker. At the time it was just awesome that if I went to Jason's house after school we could get on the modem and dial into BBSs. So she would uncover hidden assets spouses were hiding from each other, especially after divorce, because child support and alimony payments are often based on differentials in income. Like once she found for a female client that her ex-husband was making over $150,000 a year under the table from his construction business and stashing it in a secret accounts, all the while committing tax fraud and underreporting his income to the state when they made the initial calculation for alimony. My ex-boss met a woman on a website called something like Sugar Babies. This woman was in her 20s, while he was in his mid-50s. But don't worry, folks, neither of them were really into the sugar daddy thing. They both just made profiles for fun. The woman was purportedly living in her parents' home in North Carolina going to school to be a nurse, while her parents raised her daughter in Florida, so she could concentrate on school. I suppose there was some truth in that, as the ex-boss flew with her to Florida and met the parents and the child. He also flew to see her and flew her to his home a number of times. Eventually he flew both her and her kid to our backward rural Texas small town and took them house shopping. A couple of weeks later, when he'd bought her yet another plane ticket to visit him, she never showed up. At that point, he hired an online investigator. He found a number of profiles across the internet using her picture. Several purported differing names, and on 2 of them, she'd posted about pending marriages to 2 other guys. She called him up the next day and claimed she missed the plane due to her car breaking down. She wanted him to loan her several $1,000s to repair it. He declined. Not me, but my father. Years before he met my mother, he had a son with someone else, and she cut my dad out completely. She had some alcohol abuse problems. My dad tried to get in contact, sent money to her family for her, etc. But when my half-brother was about 8, she sent word that she'd asked him if he wanted to meet his father, and he'd said no, and then she disappeared, taking him with her. This was around 1976. No internet and none of the family would help my father. Fast forward to 2003 and my mother is flicking through Friends Reunited when she finds a message from someone looking for my father. The message was from a woman who turned out to be my half-brother's then wife. Slightly confusing, sorry, but had been on there a while before my mother saw it, and there was no response when my father messaged her. So my father, now confident that his son wanted to meet him, hired a pie. It took this bloke about 3 days to get back to my father with email addresses, home address and place of work. They start emailing, and a few months later my father met his 36-year-old son for the first time. My other siblings and I had no knowledge whatsoever about our older half-brother at that time. That was interesting conversation. But happy endings all round. Last year we were at his wedding to his new wife and my dad sat on the top table. Without a pie it may have taken a few more years to find him, Facebook etc. And my dad's so happy to be back in touch. Plus he's now a grandfather. I learned that sometimes you have to pay a pie money to get your friends to be friends and speak on your behalf. I got accused, falsely, of misdemeanor theft by a former employer. Lost my new job. Former boss defamed me on the phone to my new job, my home, my clean record. Spent some time in jail. Then I spent months asking my former co-workers' friends to speak on my behalf to my lawyer. All I needed were some statements about my job and my general character, which would be given to the prosecutor for review before this shit-show went to trial. The statements would persuade the already disinterested prosecution from going forward with a trial. Firstly, people will say all sorts of things that sound like they want to help you, but in reality they'll say anything to get you to hang up and leave them alone. They'll gladly stop associating with you and will always put their job safety before helping someone else out. I was told so many times by these guys that they'd talk and they felt sorry, but when it came time to get the lawyer on the phone or email, they were impossible to get a hold of. Secondly, people will refuse to do something, even if it helps them when they are scared. If my friends weren't going to speak, and the trial went on as planned, they were going to be subpoenaed into appearing by the state, and would have to speak then in a public setting, guaranteed. However, if they recorded statements with my lawyer, the case would be dropped, and their information would never go public. Obvious choice, right? Even if the statements weren't going to affect their job, even if it was going to save them having to speak in public, guaranteed, they wouldn't come forward. Basically, you can be nice as hell to people, you can give them shifts at your job, you can do endless favors, you can help them with learning new stuff at a job, you can buy them food frequently, and be an awesome friend, but they'll disappear when you need them most. I finally broke down and hired a pie through my lawyer. The very first weekend they worked, they got 2 statements from 2 out of 5 of the people I asked, and practically begged many times to help. These friends got scared as hell when the pie approached them and spilled everything we needed to prove I was innocent. It was magic. The case is being dropped now, and my record will be cleared. Moral of the story: don't rely on friends for favors when it comes to criminal defense. Hire a lawyer and get the pie to do the footwork, because expecting people to be a pal and speak on your behalf will get you nowhere. Pies know how to get people to see sense and do the right thing when it comes to statements. My sister personally investigated the whereabouts of my sperm donor father via Facebook a few years back. Turns out he's had a girlfriend for a while, and I have several brothers, sisters, uncles, grandpas I never knew about. We now communicate with them on Facebook quite often and have been trying to initiate family gathering type stuff. We never call the sperm donor for anything, as he is still a huge piece of shit that beats his girlfriend up in front of his grandchildren that my brother-in-law had him watch every so often up until the point at which this occurred. My main brother-in-law just got out of jail and is trying to regain his footing in the workplace. He's the one who had the sperm donor watch his kids. The other also got out of jail and is doing awesome with his kids and wife currently. My half-sister has 6 kids, 5 with one dad and 1 with another. They're ghetto as fuck. The 15-year-old is pregnant. The oldest boy ran away with a gang for the longest time, came back, and most likely will eventually go back sadly. Also, my half-sister's husband left her, so she is struggling, which is very unfortunate. My actual sister from my mom is with her boyfriend a few blocks away. They have been together for 11 years now. I have an awesome niece. Wish my brother-in-law wasn't such a drunk fuck. My niece is amazing, and he is bringing them all down, and my sister is too stupid to get a real job and get out of there. Yeah, family issues. Okay, my drunken rant is over. Enjoy Reddit. I didn't have any involvement in the tale I'm about to present to you, but I live in a small town and rumors spread quickly. I live in the ass end of nowhere, small town of only a couple hundred people. Everybody knew everybody. Town-wide BBQs were held often, and overall it was a nice town. One day this chick moves in with her son, who was 15, which was my age at the time. The woman didn't have much of a backstory. She was a lawyer and spoiled her kid quite often. The funny thing is though, the kid wasn't a brat and he never acted spoiled. Just plain creepy. Skin like printer paper and quieter than a mute. He wore goth-esque clothes, and if you passed by him his headphones were blaring heavy metal. I was friends with the mayor's kid, and he told me that his dad hired a personal investigator to find out more about this kid. Turns out he was incredibly good at throwing knives, and his dad was a magician before he was murdered by a gang. His dad used to perform street tricks and then pickpocketed people for a local gang. One day he wanted out to become a magician and asked for all the money they owed him. After they refused, he stole it and moved away. He convinced his ex-wife to let him see his kid now for visitation, since he had a career, and within a year he was murdered. All the publicity he got for being a notable magician probably gave him some unwanted attention. The kid was pretty faked up about it and convinced his mom to move out of the state altogether. My friend gave me constant updates on info the pie had found. A week after he was hired, he showed up dead in the sewer, stabbed 6 times in the ribs, and his throat was slit. After months of investigation, no killer was found. But I still think that kid did it. Pretty faked up story I tell whenever I hit the bar. Not me. Close friend of mine hired a pie to find her birth mother. Birth mother ended up being some crack hoe. I mean that literally. A life of drugs and unscrupulous means of making money. My friend wasn't exactly a upstanding member of the community herself, but it was mostly personality issues and not related to substance abuse or anything. In my more callous moods, I blame it on her mother probably doing drugs while my friend was in utero. Anyway, she found she has a biological half-brother. Neither of them know their fathers. Mom's a crack hoe, remember, and he's a nice kid and doing well in life, and they keep in touch. A short while later, my friend hits on some hard times, decides she wants to move in with her BO mom and get to know her. Ends up getting raped by BO mom's live-in boyfriend, pimp, and then her BO mom physically assaults her upon finding out. I say raped because my friend is a lifelong compulsive liar and a bit of a slut. She probably consented to sleeping with him and then only cried rap after her mom found out. Either way, nobody went to jail or anything, but they no longer speak. They aren't even friends on Facebook anymore. She did steal her mom's cat when she left though. All told, pretty crazy shit, and all happened over the course of like 2 months. In high school, an obscene amount of cats were turning up dead in one part of a local park. Over time, turns out the community goths were having /making /performing sentences or something, and would crucify a cat /kitten during their playtime. They would find paint tubes and those black chainmail pant things, the ones with jump ropes on them or something, at the areas. No one caught them during the act because they started having meetings in random locations after the police started watching that area. Pretty unrelated to hiring a pie, but we kind of detectiverized on our own. We drove around town bored one night, found them near the same damn spot, went to Walmart, bought chicken livers, eggs, and some ground beef in one of the missile-sized packages. We were in the back of the truck and pulled up on a side road. Approached them from the opposite side and mailed the shit out of them. Felt like an hour. Eggs and chunks of meat everywhere. Smelly goths. No more dead kitty cats. Edited spelling because phone is a sweet potato. V2.0. So I only have one pie story, and it was actually a pie hired by my ex-employer to investigate me. So the backstory was I had just moved to the US and got married, was living off my savings, while waiting for my work visa etc. When I finally got my visa I was getting close to the end of my savings, so I took the first real job I could get. Mind you, this was a programmer position. So I start working for this guy and I begin to realize this guy isn't on the up and up so to speak, and a real piece of work. Plus the company I was working for was a small software shop that provided software for MLM, multi-level marketing, think pyramid schemes but legal, barely. Of course I was a little naive and had no idea what MLM was at the time and I needed the job. Anyway, it sucked balls. Horrible job. I was meant to be a programmer, but spent more time providing technical support for the shitty software, usually because it was buggy as hell. Anyway, I finally had enough and quit. There is a fun story behind that. So after I quit, the boss gives me a load of shit, calls me up, and swears at me, and threatens me, and all sorts of BS. I pretty much don't care at this point, since I had been offered 2 different jobs, and was ready to leave that part of my career behind. So a week later there is a knock on my door, so I go answer and it's some pie dude that my ex-boss had hired. Basically my boss thought I had stolen a couple of blank CDs and stolen the code for the software and had sent this pie over to give me some shit. The funniest thing about it was, my desk with my computer was right by the door. It was a small apartment, and sitting on my desk, in plain view, was this spindle of 100 blank CDs. I mean, obvious as you can get. I said to the pie, look, why would I steal a couple of blank CDs when I have a whole spindle sitting here on my desk? The pie pretty much agrees, asks a couple of BS questions, and goes on his way. So about a week later the guy shows up again and hands me a piece of paper that my ex-boss had typed out, basically an invoice, so to speak, of why he wasn't going to pay me my last paycheck because of a bunch of things he had put down, like cost of cell phone he had gotten me for company business etc. A bunch of bullshit. I didn't care, it wasn't a large amount of cash, and I was more than happy to be rid of him. Never heard a peep out of the guy ever again. So basically the pie was an expensive messenger boy that could have been done with a FedEx instead. My brother hired a pie back in 2007. He didn't know where else to turn. He travels a lot for work, so he's not home much. His wife's name as well, let's call her Hannah. She's not very good with computers, so their daughter helped her set up Skype so they could talk every single night over webcam. After about a month she started getting on there every other day. Eventually he was lucky to talk to her once a week. Whenever he asked her about it, she would just say I'm tired, or some shitty excuse. He was so upset I didn't feel like I could offer much help over the phone. He couldn't just fly home and fix things though. He needed the money for his daughter's medical bills. She was hit by a car when she was 6 and had to have brain surgery. I did the only thing I thought I could do. I went over to his house to check on Hannah and their daughter Hallie. I showed up at about 11 after I got off of work. When I knocked on the door, Hallie answered and let me in. There was some talking in the kitchen, so I headed in there. Hannah was talking to a man across the counter. Turns out he's just her boss. That's cool. We get to talking and everything seems fine. He's even got a wedding ring. I call my brother the next day when I'm at the airport. I'm heading out with my to see her family this day by the way, so I wasn't able to do anything at this point. He tells me his wife's boss is a woman. So I fronted him some money and told him to hire a pie cause it didn't look right. So he did. I gave him the number of a pie my friend told me about, Gary. This guy was a badass, pie for 8 years, was a detective before that, bodybuilder, marine, you name it. Gar is the best and that's why he's not cheap, but my friend managed to talk him into taking payments instead of paying him everything at one time. After a few days my brother got a call from Gary. Gary told him he had pictures of Hannah going into a motel with that bastard. My brother booked a flight straight home. He had to figure this out. Turns out Hannah had been faking almost every guy in her office. They ended up getting a divorce, and she got custody of Hallie. This on top of all of the medical bills, and being out of a job meant my brother was screwed. I wasn't exactly loaded on cash right now, but I told him I'd help pay off Gary, since he was still working on that. I went in to see Gary the next day, to pay him the rest of what my brother wrote him. My wife was pissed that it was going to be a lot, but I assured her we could handle it. This was my brother, I couldn't just leave him hanging like that. I got to talking with Gary, and he said my brother hadn't been keeping up with his payments. So I replied, what do you need? He said I need about $350. Now it was around this time that I realized that Gary was actually 7 stories tall and was a crustacean from the Paleozoic era. My brother ended up getting custody after 2 years of waiting and gathering up evidence to use against her. He's a great father, and even through all of this, he managed to come out on top. TLDR, don't get a job where you need to travel, and please watch your kids when they're outside. Kind of a long faked up story, but worth it. I met this girl in high school. Her name was Sherry Henson. She was beautiful, blonde, tall, thin, pretty much a perfect 10. We became friends during school, but lost touch after. Anyways, about 12 or 13 years after high school ended, my buddy Tom convinced me to track her down. I'd been in some pretty bad relationships up until then. I was hesitant, but went for it. I didn't research the detectives very well, but I found this guy Matt who was about my age. That convinced me he could find Sherry. Here's where it gets faked up. Matt tracks her down. Apparently she's moved across the country and is a doctor. I don't hear much from Matt for the next few weeks, but when I finally catch up with him, it turns out that this son of a bitch has fallen in love with Sherry, and he's doing nothing to bring us back together. So I have to take it upon myself to reunite with Sherry. Tom and I able to track her down, but she finds out through a friend of hers that I hired Matt to track her down. Obviously she's weirded out. She thinks I'm some kind of stalker and doesn't understand that I'm just still simply in love with her. Here's where it gets really faked up. Apparently Tom and Sherry know each other. How? I don't know. But it turns out that Sherry filed a restraining order against Tom, and Tom's motive the entire time was to rekindle something he thought they had. I later find out that Tom had some weird fetishes and Sherry wasn't into that sort of thing. Anyways, long story short, myself, Tom, Matt, Sherry and her friend end up in the same room at the same time. I don't remember exactly how it happened, but it was awkward. Sherry decides this is the best time to tell us all basically to go fuck ourselves. Oh, and to top it off, one of her ex-boyfriends is in town for some convention or something, and he shows up. So there we are, all of us pining after the same girl. Needless to say she was overwhelmed. I left that day in tears. I was devastated. I had thought about Sherry for over a decade. I was madly in love with her. I haven't spoken to Tom since. I haven't heard from Matt in a few years. I ain't paying that scumbag a dime. I found out about a year after this whole thing that he spent the money I paid him as a down payment on a new set of faking teeth. Who does that? What kind of psycho did I hire? Anyways, that's my story. I still think about Sherry all the time. There's just something about her. Edit. The Reddit gods must be smiling on me today. Sherry just called me. She said she's been thinking about me ever since. She said, and I quote, "I always knew I'd be the happiest with you, Fred." About 3 in my late 30s I met this guy who actually ended up becoming my best friend. This is more his story than mine, but I'll tell it anyway. When I first met him, we hit off right away. He was a little odd, like myself, but we always got along pretty well. We shared some common interests, and eventually became roommates. The thing with him is that his older brother was into some shady stuff and always ended up getting my buddy involved in his schemes. This would often include sneaking off in the middle of the night, which he did with his brother, until I started following him around. I did this for a couple weeks, but he eventually caught on and started inviting me along. I was kinda shocked at this and went out with him a couple times to see what he was up to, but it was just general sneaking around and into places we probably shouldn't have gone. Anyway, this one night he leaves and doesn't come back. I later find out that he got into a fight with one of his friends and got beaten up pretty bad and ended up dying in the hospital. I was really grieved at my friend's loss and wasn't really sociable for a while, that is, until I met this really nice girl and things started getting serious between us and we eventually got married. It was around that time that I heard a rumor that my friend had faked his death to get out of all the crap that his brother had gotten him into. I never confirmed this as it was all hearsay, but it gave me a little comfort to know that my friend might be out there somewhere. All was going well. I had a loving wife and a good life at home. That is until I noticed my wife gone in the middle of the night. I never thought much about this until my buddy, who I thought had died 2 years earlier, happens to show up one day and tell me about my wife's past, how she was an assassin for the CIA. I confronted her about this and she said it was true. It was all quite a shock for me, but I suppose that is my fault, you know, my becoming best friends with Sherlock Holmes.